Welcome to another edition of Seahawks Forever. And today we're going to be taking a look back over the last 7 or 8 days, maybe the most chaotic and transformative period as a whole that we've ever seen as Seahawk fans. There have been big moves in a vacuum, but man, this last week just makes your head spin, right? Well, who better to kind of put it all in perspective than Jeff Simmons of RealHawkTalk? You also see him on with Rob Staten on a weekly basis. Always appreciate Jeff's analysis. Very balanced and informed. He has a very good football mind, but he's also a fan, and I feel like he meshes those two things really well together. He's got some great things to say about how he feels about the change at quarterback, where he thinks things stand with the offensive line, and then we're going to play a game of fan word association, giving him some of the more common Twitter takes, shall we say, that we get during times like this, and have him react to those. It's going to be a lot of fun. That's coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
This program brought to you by the folks at Doer, built for doing lifestyle apparel for every occasion. And my favorite thing about what they do, I love all of their clothing, but these stretch performance jeans right here, you can see on their website, shopdoer.com. They are unbelievable. 20% stretch. They move with you. They are light. They are versatile. You can wear them when you're doing errands around the house. You can wear them on date night because they are also built tough. They are built to last, also built with sustainable materials. They're antibacterial and breathable. And right now, they're going to give you 20% off your order. You know why? Because you watch the show. Go to shopdoer.com/forever to cash in on that offer. That's shopdoer, DUER.com/forever for 20% off your first order. Welcome back, you guys. Be sure before we get started to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that bell button for notification of future episodes. And if you want to support the show, all those different ways you can do that are listed down below as well. This was a recorded show, so I apologize if any massive breaking news happens between now and the time you watch it, but unlikely given that the Seahawks were introducing officially all of their new players today. So let's get right into this. This is my conversation I had earlier today with Jeff Simmons about all things Seahawks and what has been a whirlwind 7 or 8 days. Enjoy. All right, Jeff, always good to be joined by you and chop it up about the Seahawks. And there's certainly no lack of subjects to talk about, right? Can you ever remember a more impactful 7 days?
I thought the Russell Wilson trade would be hard to top, but the amount of things that just caught me by surprise. And if you follow my tweets, I don't want to pat myself. I'm usually pretty in line with kind of what's going to happen. There were times in the year where I speculated. Me and Rob Staten do a show every Monday, and there was times where like we've talked about like maybe they'll kind of pivot off Geno,
right?
And we went through this scenario and like we played it out, and like it always felt like a complete like I was thinking like there's no way this would happen. And
yeah,
I don't think the Seahawks planned this.
No. And that's the crazy thing about all this is I've done the same thing. Like in a vacuum, I've looked into every single one of those possible moves over the last 2 years because at some level, they all make football business sense, you know, when you're just talking about building a roster and building for the future. But I never thought they would all happen all at the same time. Where were you because we saw the DK thing coming? There was smoke, there was buzz, but where were you when the Geno news broke?
I was at home. For me, it was Friday evening, and I have a new baby. So we have between a 2 and a 3-month-old. And
so you're not sleeping much.
I'm not sleeping much. And so this last week or so has just been crazy. All the thoughts and the things running through my mind. And when I was in the hospital with the kid, actually, at the beginning of January, like one of the things I was doing was I was like playing with the Seahawks over the cap a lot.
Sure.
And I was just like, you know what? Everyone is like keeps saying this is like a cap mess, and I'm like, their cap's actually really good.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's like, oh, the Seahawks have this cap crunch coming, and I'm like, I started looking at all the other teams. I'm like, they actually could clear out to have like the 5th most cap space very quickly. But I thought they were going to extend those guys.
Right.
And so the messaging coming out of the team, it's like, okay, I have this read pretty well. But I'm like, if they trade Geno, it actually creates way more space. But I'm just like, that's not going to happen. And then, so the trade comes out on Friday night, and I'm with my little 2-month-old. And I was just, I couldn't get off. I was not the best parent in that moment. It was just, it took me by surprise. There's one point where he was like, Daddy, pay attention to me. And so my wife had to take over, and I had to like kind of calm myself down. But I was shocked, even though there was a lot of buzz that day. Like Charles Robinson from Yahoo kind of alluded to what he was hearing. And some of the Raiders writers had been kind of,
the night before there were those reports that the Raiders were looking at veteran starting.
Yeah, so their main beat writer, I think Vincent Bonsignor is one of their main beat writers, and he's been pretty good with them. He's been dead on. So I was like, okay, I get it, but like the Seahawks aren't going to actually do this. Right. And then the Friday there was buzz. I was hearing buzz from like my channels that Sam Darnold's market was cold, and so I'm like, maybe this is all connected. But I'm like, they're gonna sign Geno, like, yeah. And then I look at my phone, and I was literally, there's not a lot of moves that like stopped me in my tracks, but that one, even though I had heard buzz about it, it still did. I right away am like, okay, this is connected to Darnold, and all the other guys I talked to were like, oh my god, like what are they doing? Like, are they drafting someone at 18? Like, what's happening? I think the whole thing was connected, but man, I still was shocked. I thought they would get like the higher third round pick. They end up getting like 20 to 30 picks later. Yeah. But I think the thing that at the end, once I kind of calmed down, and the crazy part is if Pete Carroll doesn't come back to the league, I'm like 98% sure this trade doesn't happen. I'm pretty sure Geno signs with the Seahawks. There's really not that much of another market. What happens at the combine, everyone thinks it's about the draft, is every agent's there and every team is there. And there's a lot of back channeling that gets done. And everyone saw the pictures of John and Pete joking around on the plane. It wasn't that, but I'm sure Geno's camp knew that Pete would pay him the money they wanted, and they were willing to trade for him. So I'm sure a strategy on their part is if we play hardball with the Seahawks, maybe they'll make the trade.
It's the only way this makes sense. Because they were never, ever going to entertain the idea of just hitting the reset button. They just weren't. As far as the whole roster goes, because if you had made this move in a vacuum, just thinking, well, I guess we're gonna have to draft a guy now, that just wouldn't fly. It wouldn't fly with ownership. It wouldn't fly with his fan base. It wouldn't fly with what Mike McDonald thought he was walking into when he took this job. It wouldn't fly with John Schneider's philosophy. And so, that the whole idea, the only way any of this makes sense is, as you said, like they knew ahead of time. They knew this was a done deal. They knew, even though there was a little bit of buzz on the day of the tampering period, that Pittsburgh was, pushing for Darnold. That felt, even in the moment, like agent speak or whatever, trying to milk a few extra dollars, and it just never seemed like it was going to go any other way than this. So that being said, how do you feel about Sam Darnold?
I'm fine with him. I realize kind of what he is and what he isn't. To me, it's kind of a flyer. I think we saw the upside of what he can do last year for the first 15 games. And look, he was in one of the best offensive infrastructures in the NFL. Kevin O'Connell's been amazing at getting the most out of quarterbacks. Like even Josh Dobbs a few years ago, who's kind of just reverted back to being a backup, had a couple of weeks where he looked like a pretty good quarterback. So I think with Darnold, he needs to have a system around him. Like Clint Kubiak, I think in that system, which is a lot of timing-based, quick throws, certain throws, I think Darnold could be fine. But I think if you're going to pivot to Darnold, who's 7 years younger than Geno, he's cheaper. He's going to be 10 to 12 million a year cheaper. I think you have to really put a good infrastructure around him to really maximize him. So I think the positive is there. I think he could provide a pretty stable level of quarterback play if he has better protection, if they can kind of protect him with the run game, protect him with play action. I think there's a chance for him to be a pretty solid quarterback in what Clint Kubiak wants to do. Now, you would have liked to then turn the money and savings they had and kind of dump that right into the offensive line, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. And there's a draft coming up, so
it might come. Yeah, we might
talk about that. But look, again, I think Schneider would never say this or never agree with it. But from my perspective, the thing I don't mind about Darnold is that his floor is kind of low. And if they don't protect him properly and they don't put the receivers around him, it could unravel. And from a Seahawks fan's perspective, maybe that's horrible. But from my perspective, I kind of like that in a twisted way, because either it works and he's good and you got a quarterback for cheap. Like Matt Hasselbeck compared himself to Darnold to him yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was cool. But if it's bad, then Seahawks should have a pretty good pick and a good quarterback draft. So I think the upside, I don't really see the downside of it. From like a fan perspective, he's kind of a boring guy. Like from what I've been told, he's all football. There's not a lot of like pizzazz to him. He's kind of bland. So a lot of Seahawks fans are like, oh, he's kind of milquetoast. I get that angle, but I actually don't really see the downside. Either he's as good as last year and you got him in a bargain like Baker, and if he sucks, you could move off pretty quickly, and then you're positioned pretty well in a what's supposed to be a pretty good quarterback draft. So
yeah,
I think with Geno, you knew the floor pretty well. And we've seen it the last few years. If you don't protect them, they're going to be a 9-10 win team. I think Geno overcame a lot of their issues. But again, like if you've heard Mike Mayock or Jeremiah or some of those like old school personnel guys, like they like to get out of these situations before they crumble. So 35-year-old quarterback, we've seen what's happened with Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson and some of the older players as they've, even Aaron Rodgers to an extent, like they've started to fall off the cliff. And Geno, I think with better protection could be pretty good, but like I have no problem moving off him. But it's the other things, it's where I have questions.
Yeah, it's amazing how many dominoes really had to fall for this to happen, right? And I'm with you. If Pete's not in the league, this isn't an option. And they roll forward with Geno. It kind of feels like with the Darnold thing too. You know, you don't make this move unless that guy's available. These guys just don't come into the open market. They just don't. 27 years old, coming off a great year. Those guys are never available. Usually the free agent quarterback market is, either old retreads or, guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick. Well, he was an old retread, but
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like, if it was just such an unusual opportunity, I guess, to at least take a shot on a guy, it sort of feels in a much more prominent way, of course, sort of like the shot they took on Sam Howell last year. This is a guy that we think has, good starter upside. He's young. Let's bring him in and just see what we have. Clearly, they don't see that in him now. And so they make this move for Darnold, but it certainly doesn't preclude them from doing anything in the future. Now, before we get to the offensive line and the infrastructure around him, because I do think I agree with you in this sense, there are reps on Darnold's tape of him successfully navigating a messy pocket. He beat the Seahawks last year with 4 minutes left on exactly such a play, but it's not something he's great at, whereas Geno was. And I think if this thing doesn't get better up front in Seattle, depending on how it goes in Las Vegas, I think people are going to see like, oh, it's so easy to criticize Geno because he never beat good teams or whatever, the detractors will say. But there were so many circumstances of him delivering and keeping us in games when he had no business doing so, because he was really good at navigating some of that mess. I keep thinking back to the Pittsburgh game 2 years ago. I mean, it's just it's unbelievable tape. So do you pair this, you personally, or do you think they will? Is it better, or would you feel better about it if they paired this now with a fairly significant use of a draft pick on a quarterback this year also?
I think you almost have to. If it's not this year, it puts a lot of pressure on next year to be in the first round. And if I were them, I just would keep taking shots. I think what Minnesota did last year, pairing Darnold, they took a flyer on him. Obviously, he had less of a track record than after last year, and they drafted J.J. McCarthy. Tom Pelissero said today on the radio, they tried to bring Darnold back on a 1-year deal, so they obviously thought quite a bit of him. But $55 guaranteed million from the Seahawks, he's going to take that deal.
Sure.
So I think putting all your eggs in the Darnold basket, I'm not quite there yet. Like, he was a top 5 pick last year, showed some of the best film, but you can't forget the last 2 games. And I think the last 2 games, in a way, kind of helped set the expectations for the floor and where things could go, and also maybe a ceiling. And so, again, I think if I'm the Seahawks, I keep taking shots. We've been saying this for years. At some point, the Seahawks are going to have a defined quarterback in the future to kind of get out of this middle zone. And if I'm them, Darnold's a great shot. Take the shot, see if he's legit. And if not, I would hedge that bet, because I don't think Sam Howell's the hedge. I think we saw enough from him last year. where it's like he's fine in a pinch, but like I don't want him. There's no starting upside there.
Yeah.
If I'm them, for this to work, they're going to need to get on the rookie quarterback structure at some point, and they're going to just need someone with a higher ceiling. So take the shot on Darnold, see if it's a thing. If it flops, you have another quarterback option. If it flops, you can keep going next year. So that's how they found Russell Wilson in the first place. Like there was Matt Flynn, could be Sam Darnold, and no one will even think twice about it.
Right. Yeah.
But
well, he's
for
much
me,
better than Matt Flynn. But
he's a much better player. Matt Flynn had 2 good games in like week 17,
right,
back when there was week 17 and wasn't week 18. But yeah, so if I'm them, and for this to really work, I think John wants like a bona fide quarterback. I don't know if that's in this draft, but I think day 2 is a potential sweet spot for them. With the 2 extra picks.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was doing mock draft simulators, and I know you're sick like me and do all these mock draft simulators. Whenever before these trades, I would take a quarterback in round 2. The whole thing just felt bad to me because of the opportunity cost.
Right.
And like, okay, they'll have Geno and Will Howard or Quinn Ewers or name a quarterback that's meh. It just felt like the amount of players you'd have to pass on to do it. But now you got the extra 2 and the extra 3. So do you move up? I don't love the idea of that, but I would take a shot with one of those. I think it doesn't feel nearly as bad with those 2 extra picks. Unless the draft gets away from them, I think one of those day 2 picks will be a quarterback.
It makes so much sense because I think when the Russell Wilson trade happened, we all expected, I think even John Schneider expected, to use some of that haul to take a guy over the next year or 2, with Geno being the bridge, but the draft just did not fall their way either of those years. The first year was just a crap draft, and the second year, everybody went before they had a shot. Well, the next 2 years went down that way. So it kind of feels that way in that sort of that 3rd round range. I feel like that's where that clump of players is. But if Jackson Dart's sitting there at 18, right, a guy that I think exhibits all of the characteristics that John Schneider loves in a quarterback, physically and makeup wise. He's only 21 years old. And unlike Quinn Ewers, who I think turns 22 tomorrow, I think, Jackson Dart's like 21 and a half. Like the timeline would match the Jordan Love timeline, right? Or the Aaron Rodgers timeline that John Schneider was involved in. How would you feel if they did that?
A little uncomfortable. Like I get the logic. Like if they have that high of a grade on them and they take them, like good. But like their offensive line situation right now and the opportunity cost of taking a swing on a quarterback and not taking that guard there and having to wait till like the 50s, it would turn my stomach a bit. Look, when I've been wrong about this a few times, like I hated the Jordan Love pick. It turned out to be like a franchise-saving move. Look what's happened to Aaron Rodgers since.
Yeah,
I thought the opportunity cost of not taking like T. Higgins there was crazy. I didn't love the Michael Penix pick, not because they signed Kirk Cousins and already they have a rookie quarterback and they can't spend their money. So had they just signed Minshew or something or taken Kirk Cousins, like, and even Bo Nix, I didn't think Bo Nix would be particularly good. He was pretty awesome last year behind a really good offensive line. So I would be I could convince myself into it pretty quick, I think. And at some point, they're going to have to take a first-round quarterback. Like the Seahawks are like the only team in the league that haven't taken a first-round quarterback since like 93 or something.
Yeah.
At some point, they're going to just have to do it. Like one of the John Schneider's biggest mistakes, if you really look back, and there's all those stories about, they could have taken Mahomes. He didn't fall to them. In that draft, they had 4 third-round picks. You know what the cost to trade from 20 whatever to – it was a first and a third. I looked it up the other day.
I just saw it I was shocked. I thought I had a bad link.
And you look at how the league have changed. The Trey Lance trade was 3 firsts.
Yeah.
And KC was actually a couple picks behind Seattle in that draft. So if you really want to, I'm sure if Schneider can kind of really beat himself up, if you look at who they took in the 3rd round that year, if to give up one of those picks and the one next year, which became Rashad Penny, that would have been nothing. So I'm sure John's been just waiting to take a dude in the 1st round for so long. Anthony Richardson was close to a couple of years back, but he's been pretty. They're paying $17 million to compete with Daniel Jones. So
dodged a bullet there.
Will Levis, no, he's already being replaced. So it's not like they passed on a quarterback. But yeah, Dart at 18, I'm not there yet. I have to dive into him a little more. I've been trying to focus on free agency, but we'll see if my opinion changes in a month. But right now, I would be more comfortable in round 2 with him.
All right. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? The big, giant, fat elephant that can't block anybody. We got to talk about the offensive line. It's all anyone wants to think about. The process so far heading into the offseason. And John has been telling us for weeks, like, they're going to take a shot. And they did. They offered the biggest contract they would have ever paid to an offensive lineman ever to Will Fries. And then it appears, and we'll talk about some other options here, but like, that was a guy that they felt was worth that kind of money. And they gave it their best shot. And they threw a bunch of money at a perennial problem. They miss out on him. And now it appears Brady Henderson even reported yesterday, they're probably out on some of the higher price guys that are out there, and they're just going to move forward and focus on the draft unless somebody comes available. Are you okay with that process?
No, not really. I commend them for getting in the Fries market. Really, when they switched to the zone scheme, like when they were like hiring an offensive coordinator, say they hired Hank Fraley, like there was a lot of offensive linemen I was excited about for this free agent class that I thought were good fits. When they switched to like the Kubiak zone, which is very specific, the names start to dwindle a bit. But my problem with this is, and this might just be the class in general, if your whole plan is to hyper-focus on one guy, and the one guy you're hyper-focusing on, the name seems to get out ahead of time. Like, Brady Henderson knew the name, and he was kind of, for someone in the organization had tipped him off, clearly. Or the agent had tipped him off at the combine, I don't know. But I don't think it's great if you're leaking, or not leaking, but the fans are aware this is your guy. You don't seem to have a backup option. And if you don't get him, like if people didn't know they were in on Will Fries, like no one would have cared. Like, but the process just seems like it was hyper-focused on him. There seems to be some word that they weren't that into Drew Dahlman, or Dahlman wanted to go to Chicago. I heard Brock Heward say that like they were concerned about his pass protection. So maybe he wasn't as big an option as I would have thought. I thought he was the most logical one. But
yeah,
if your whole free agent plan is just hyper-focused on one guy, you make it kind of public and you don't get him, and then you don't really have a plan B, it's a hard plan to swallow. Like John talked about in his last show on the 710 when he does that they have all these plans and they have a pivot plan. And
right.
But then you look at the names out here, and I get why they're not that excited about these guys. Usually when a good players hit the market, there's something wrong with them. Like good offensive linemen are not hitting the market anymore. Trey Smith got tagged. I would have loved for them to get into Joe Thuney. Like Joe Thuney would have been that looks like that would have been with all this cap space, but they probably didn't know they had all this cap space at the time. But that looks like a miss from their perspective. But John Benton coached Mekhi Becton with the Jets, and those were not Mekhi Becton's best years. He had problems staying on the field. There was questions about his weight, and I've wondered whether he's his own blocker at all. He's so big.
Yeah,
he's perfect. When you watched him play the Rams, like watching him like pancake the dudes on some of those Saquon runs was striking to me. I remember texting some of my buddies. I'm like, they need to sign this guy. Like, I don't know if he's a leader, and they badly need a leader in that room.
Yeah.
But then I look, and Tevin Jenkins has had injury concerns, and there's questions of kind of like, why is he still out there? Because people don't know if he's like got a lot of years left. So he's a young player, but he's had injury problems. He's been beaten up, and that's usually what happened. Will Fries was a guy coming off a broken leg and had 6 teams interested in him. That's saying a lot about the market. So I commend the Seahawks for making a push and going higher and realizing they have a problem and adjusting their plan. But ultimately, this is a results business, and there's really no excuse not to get one of these jobs done with the cap room they had. And I think it is ultimately a miss when you create all that room, you get rid of DK, you have all the room to invest in these line. It's hard for me to just say, okay, on to the draft. But I will say, like looking at the list now and looking at the guards that are available in the draft, like the higher upside moves are certainly in the draft.
Yeah.
Like a Tate Ratledge or the kid from North Dakota State.
Yeah, Gray
Zabel. Like they got a lot more. Like if you look at the Rams, for example, the last 2 years, like they were actually planning to be bad. Like they got rid of all their guys. They were kind of resetting. And then they pulled 2 insane draft classes out of nowhere one year without even having a first round pick.
Right.
And they're back to being a contender. They haven't really signed free agents. And the ones they did, Jonah Jackson already traded. Colby Parkinson did not work out. There was a corner from Buffalo, Tre'Davious White, like cut already. So the draft is really what makes these things good. But again, unfortunately for the Seahawks, it's not just that they didn't sign Fries. It's not just bad process. He's almost like a symbol of just 10 years of not addressing a problem.
Right.
And it's a bad look. And then there's questions whether I saw kind of the things you've been alluding to. I don't have much information on that front. I've seen the reporters have had different information, but at some point, if that is an issue, you got to have a plan that kind of revolves around how you can get guys when that's a potential hold up to a deal. So I've said all along, no excuses. It's tough to swallow kind of what they've done and leaving. If they don't come out of the draft with some names, like how do you sell hope right now?
It's tough because, the fan base is just hyper focused on that position, and for good reason. I get it. Right. It does feel like they needed to add a veteran because that offensive line is just too young. It's one of the many issues with it. It's just, in fact, now that Tomlinson's not on the roster anymore, I haven't seen this for certain, but I would guarantee you it's the youngest offensive line group in the entire league. It's got to be 32nd out of 32.
It's got to be.
And that's, it's a position group that relies as much as any other on continuity. You need some experience in there. It's why they kept Laken Tomlinson all last year, even though he wasn't very good, because he gave them at least that element, and I think they thought they were getting that a little bit. Connor Williams, he just wasn't there. I feel like if the Becton move, because of the Benton connection that you alluded to, if that was something that they valued, I feel like that would have happened already.
That's kind of that was my thought too.
Yeah. The Jenkins thing I'm intrigued by, but given the injury history, like he's got some really good tape, especially getting to the second level. Mm-hmm. But, Seahawks place a very, very high premium on the durability issue. That's some of the lessons that John has learned along the way. And some of them are overreactions, and I wish he would open his mind to them a little bit more. Right. But, the Rashad Penny thing, and they've been burned by some injury issues before, even though Penny, one of the reasons they drafted him was that his, durability grade in their analytics or whatever was off the charts. But I just, there's been conflicting reports. Brady said they're kind of done with veteran free agency, but then there was some reporting later in the day that they're one of the 3-ish teams in on Tevin Jenkins. I would just imagine that it's probably a very firm number that they're comfortable with, not a lot of guaranteed money. Hey, here's what we have for you if you can't find anything better. I still feel like he might be a possibility, but if he's not, and they just move forward and we get to the draft and no one else has been added to the roster, like what's your mock draft process? Do you take an offensive lineman every time at 18? Do you think that's where they're at, or are there some other scenarios that you can paint?
Well, they have 50 and 52, but like the worst I feel when I do any of these mock drafts is where you get to 50 and just the whole interior market gets cleaned up. And I'm at the point where trading down from 18, maybe getting into the 20s and taking a Donovan Jackson or a Gray Zabel, I think that has become one of my favorite scenarios because then they can add another pick.
Right.
And if they want, they can use one of that pick to even move up a second rounder, move up a third rounder. So, or they can just keep drafting. Like if you want to be the Rams, crush a draft. They've had some good drafts. They have very few great drafts since the early days. So I think that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like if they don't sign anyone for agency, like I love Tate Radledge. I think out of the combine, he's become like one of my favorite guys, but like
it's the mullet, right?
The mullet, just the movement skills.
Yeah.
He's kind of a badass. Like one of the things about the Seahawks is, and that's why I've loved veteran free agents. Well, I don't know if Will Fries is this necessarily, but like they kind of need like kind of a loudy leader, like kind of a dirtbag, like what Jim Moore used to say back in the day.
Right. Yeah.
But like Ryan Jensen went to Tampa Bay like years ago, and it totally changed like the mentality of their offensive line. Like Tyler Booker, I don't know if he's the best fit in the scheme they're running, but God, from like a personality and like play style fit,
yeah,
it's hard not to think he's like the perfect guy to drop in a left guard. But his movement skills and his relative athletic score were pretty alarming. But I still would think like character-wise, I think John Benton is going to have a really big emphasis on who they evaluate. So like I think Zabel, Ratledge, Donovan Jackson, I think they're all hand and glove fits. I think there's a lot of upside to them. And the cool thing about like Donovan Jackson is he played left tackle this year when Josh Simmons got hurt.
Yeah, played well.
He's got some extra versatility there. So I think for me, the best scenario right now is kind of move down into the 20s, get a Zabel or Jackson. Houston's going to be certainly looking for offensive linemen. So maybe get in front of them. Or if you like two of them, you can maybe kind of get another pick But it's tough because some of the guys I think are the safest bets that fall to 18 might be like Jahad Campbell and the safety. And if I'm looking at like organizational needs, inside linebacker and safety are very low.
Right.
So it leaves kind of an interesting spot because the Seahawks have kind of transitioned into a really best player available team. And they've had much better results the last 3 years.
Sure.
But this year, there's so much hyper focus on that one spot. It's so interesting. So for me, the best draft is to move down, get a guard, lock that down, and maybe double dip in round 2 if a Wilson and there's so many guys, and they're in the sweet spot for the guards. Like Daniel Jeremiah said, day 2, you're going to be able to find guards.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
a bunch of the guys in that class can play center too. I think that's intriguing if you were to double dip, and I'm with you. And one of the reasons that I agree with that approach is because, what have we heard about this draft? It lacks at the top. It lacks blue chip talent. I haven't heard of a single analyst or reporter, referencing a team that had double digit first round grades. We're hearing a lot of 8 and 9 true first round grades, and that's it. So if you're sitting at 18 and you don't have any first round grades left on your board, then of course you're going to look to trade back. And if some people might ask, well, then it's going to be tough to find a trade partner. They're not going to want to move up. Well, in a draft that's the deep like this, and the other take on this draft from the consensus seems to be that from 10 to about 100, the talent level is very level or very even. So it only takes a team falling in love with one guy, right? Or having an overwhelming need wanting to move up. How about this though? Because I was intrigued by some of the meetings that they had at the combine. And for those people that are worried about like waiting until the draft, I always point out to them that when we saw the combine list of reported visits, like 60% of them were all offensive linemen. And it was a great list. They weren't like looking at the guys you haven't heard of or, trying to find that hidden gem. They were all the good dudes, including some guys that look like they would have no business being there at 18. They talked to Will Campbell at the combine, which is interesting. They talked to Tyler Booker. Could this, given that extra picks, no first round grades, what if they move up for one of those guys, right? If Will Campbell starts to slip because of the concerns about arm length and can he play tackle or whatever, even the people that believe that he might not be able to stick at tackle all agree he could be a dominant left guard. And he exhibits a lot of those leadership qualities that you just talked about with Tyler Booker. Like teams just love that guy's mentality. If he slips to 10 or 11, like, could this be the year that John Schneider moves up aggressively?
it's really not his style, but Will Campbell would be an interesting guy because he would be such a good fit. I would be surprised because I think that they've been sitting there with this stock and they just want to use it. But Will Campbell, there's got to be internal, external pressure about this offensive line.
Oh, yeah.
If you can trade up for a guy that some people think could go in the top 5 and not make it like a crazy trade, I think people would get behind that pretty quick. And I think it'd be an easy PR win for Schneider. Some of like the analytic people in the draft would hate it. But I think the Seahawks are at a point, especially Schneider, it's like, if you don't come out of this draft with some good offensive line picks, you got to wonder how much longer he's going to be here. So I don't think it's out of the question. I think Tyler Booker would be a no for a trade up. I think the Seahawks have been a historically patient team, and John's nature is usually a trade down.
Yeah.
And especially with like a huge clump of offensive line this year, I think it's probably a long shot.
Kelvin Banks is another guy that I feel like has kind of gotten lost in the mix the last couple of weeks. He's a guy that might just fall to 18, but another player that, while some teams believe he can stick at tackle and the measurements, seem to back that up, most seem to think if you do kick him inside, he could have like all pro upside. He's another guy that I just feel like got a lot of buzz early in the process, and now no one seems to be really talking about him. All right, let's do this. I promise you we do this because one of the things, and there's a reason I'm taking the weekend off this weekend, unless there's any big breaking news. Like I need to not stare at a computer screen for 10 hours a day. My
screen time is pathetic.
It's
in the last week.
Literally made an eye appointment for later today because there's, I just feel like they're taking a beating. But I just need a break from social media too, and all of the negativity and the cynicism. And I understand, every time there's a poll about how fans feel, it's usually 80% positive. It's just the 20% are the louder on social media, and they're the ones that always end up in your view. And so there's a couple of consistent themes among some of the reaction from fans that you hear every single time. It's very predictable. Anytime you see a post, the Seahawks are signing this guy, the Seahawks are acquiring that guy. You know what's coming, right? So I thought we would do a little bit kind of like word association, but I call it fan take association, where I'll put up like a widely circulated common take that we've all seen, and you react to it. All right, you ready to play?
Let's go it.
All right, the first one. Sam Darnold is going to get killed behind that offensive line.
If there was no draft, and I think that's dumb, because I think the offensive line could be kind of resolved in the draft. And they have 5 picks in the top 100, and what's the sweet spot of the draft? Interior offensive line. So if they didn't have a draft and this was it, yeah, that would be pretty reasonable. They don't have a left guard right now. Their right guard is really, but I think one of the things that, I'm going to sound like a bit of a homer, but they have a lot of offensive line coaches on their staff. And I don't mean people who are just offensive line. It's people who can teach and educate the same system.
Yeah.
So they have John Benton, who was around Kubiak for a long time. They have Rick Dennison, who was around Kubiak's dad, who was a run game coordinator, offensive line. And then Justin Ouden, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They've been pretty good historically at kind of coaching the same system. So I think Christian Haynes is going to take a step forward. Bob Condata wrote the other night that the staff is kind of excited about him. I don't know how LeMaya fits. He's more of a gap guy than I think a mover. But I think even with like a second round pick, I think what this staff can do is really coach these guys up. But if we have to see the draft. The draft is now everything for them. They got, again, 5 picks in the top 100 in a draft that's known for interior offensive line.
Yeah.
If they whiff, then I don't think that fan take is that crazy.
Right.
If they have a really good draft, this thing could get better a lot faster. And you look at some of the best offensive lines, very few of them are built through free agency. Usually you put one piece in there, a couple, but a lot of them, like Philadelphia, draft. They took a flyer on Mekhi Becton, but they planned for years.
Right.
I do think ideally they would have a vet in there. And ideally they'd have a quality vet in there because they need leadership. But we have to wait and see. It's an annoying take because we say this every year. But I think this draft with this coaching staff in this scheme that's known to kind of elevate kind of mid to lower level players, I think it's an annoying take and hard to be able to swallow, but I'm going to say no until the end of April. We'll revisit this.
Right. And that answer might have also kind of answered this next one. I sort of did this in 3 parts, right? Every player that they sign now, you get this. We signed Josh Jones. Can he play guard? Actually, he can, but that's not his natural position. That's the sentiment. We signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Can he play guard? We signed Dexter Lawrence. Can he play guard? And you kind of answered this, but luckily the season doesn't start tomorrow.
Yeah, like I get it. I've been frustrated as anyone with how they've handled the guard over the years. They've passed on several players who I've identified as good fits. Free agency, they've not valued the position. I think there's a fair case now that Damian Lewis's contract that they walked away from that they thought was way overvalued looks pretty damn good in this market.
It's less than Will Fries was making.
And like you look at Leonard Williams last year, made $21 million in a different position. That looks like a pretty big bargain right now. Like, would he have got $30 million in this market?
Right.
Julian Love they signed, so they have not handled the position well. So I understand the fans' sentiment and frustration because I'm there. I've had a very frustrated week with the whole offensive line market going and them being out of it. But it's kind of a dumb take. Like, part of free agency is not just to plug holes, in my opinion. And I think Schneider has not done a good enough job of this. But I think free agency, a big part of it, is building strength on strength and really elevating what your team's good at. Like, if I was the Seahawks right now, almost every move I would have made in free agency, almost every move, would have been to really build a run game. But I think one of the things I also would have done is to really pour more resources into my defensive line, which is a good group, but has potential to be a great group with either another edge rusher. Dexter Lawrence was, in my opinion, not only one of the best signings they could have made. They lost a lot of bodies, and go watch the end of the Seattle-Dallas game from a couple of years ago, why they won that game. I was like, well, he's only had 6 sacks or something. That's not what Dexter Lawrence does.
Yeah,
like,
he's a tenacious run defender.
Go watch how many plays he blew up in that game. And Aiden Dirty, from what I understand, was the biggest reason they ended up signing him. So if you're here complaining that they're trying to also build their defensive line, which is probably the number one strength of their team, and making it better, and they just went from essentially Draymond Jones and Roy Robertson Harris to this dude, I'm going to laugh at you if you tweet something like that to me. But
well, here's the next one. Dexter Lawrence is old and broken down.
well, there's a reason he's in the second wave of free agency.
Right.
So one thing I'm commonly being annoying about is like, don't fall for the agent numbers on Twitter.
Yeah.
And don't fall for them. And now it's gone to the point where the insiders are putting the names of the agents in the tweets. And the numbers to look at is when I saw it, everyone's like, oh my God, $40 million for an old guy. I'm like, it's $18 million guaranteed. Like, that's like not even, it's more than half the contract. So it's crazy to me. But look, anyone who hits free agency has a flaw these days.
Mm-hmm.
Like Will Fry's coming off a broken leg. He was one of the top free agents in the market. Drew Dahlman, not a great pass protector. But he's a really good run blocker. A lot of these guys are either declining or old or coming off injuries. Anyone good that's supposed to hit the market, T. Higgins, Trey Smith, they get tagged or signed.
Yeah. The Colts weren't aggressive in trying to keep Will Fries. Everybody wants Tevin Jenkins now. They went and rebuilt their entire interior offensive line. Have no interest in bringing him back. It is buyer beware on some of these guys. For
a
sure.
lot of these guys. And look,
yeah,
the reason Dexter Lawrence is available is because he had a Lisfranc injury last year and only played 4 games. Yeah. He's an older player, but the Seahawks have a coach that knows him inside and out, was with him for 3 years. So we don't know if he's old or broken down. He had a Lisfranc foot injury. It's not like a Achilles injury where you just might not be the same.
Yeah.
Even if he is, it's a bet. Every free agent move is a bet at some extent. You're looking probably at a 2-year deal. I'd be shocked if he makes it to the 3rd year, and if he does, it means he's played way better than their contract.
Right.
Sam Darnold had that 2-game meltdown to an extent. Any one of these guys, Russell Wilson, he can't play anymore. Aaron Rodgers, he's a locker room nightmare. These guys that are hitting free agency, there's usually something off about them. There's rarely a guy like Joe Thuney did a couple years ago where New England was just transitioning that at Brady and like a rare guy hits. But I think Dexter Lawrence was a good signing. Like, there's no, even if he doesn't work out, he gets hurt again. Like, I think the bet is a good bet, and that's all you're taking a shot on at this point. If he's old and broken down, then what did you really give up? So, yeah, I think that's a bad take.
People forget about the flawed aspect of that evaluation that you just pointed out, because then we see headlines like we saw last night that was trending on Twitter: Giants bolster offensive line by signing Stone Forsythe, right? One man's trash is another man's treasure. Isn't that the old saying? Like, yeah, it's easy to forget. And then the final one, John Schneider doesn't care about the offensive line and never will build a good one. Where are you at with John Schneider as far as his job status? Do you think he can still salvage his legacy and pull out of this thing, or do you think he's on borrowed time?
I think it's getting tight, man. I think it's getting tight. I don't think he doesn't care. I think he really sticks to his valuations. And I think I'm a Blue Jays fan. They've had similar problems in
We're
free
all
agency.
Mariner fans here, too.
You're a Mariners fan. So
similar...
the Mariners have a spending issue. The Blue Jays have, for example, have been in a lot of free agent races a couple years ago where they've come second. That's like the joke in Toronto where I live. I think Schneider has some of the same problems where he sticks to his evaluations, and that's not how you win free agents, unfortunately. You usually have to overpay, and sometimes they overcorrect, but the fact that they tried to sign Will Fries and offered him what appears to be $17 million a year, or close to that, that's not someone who doesn't value offensive line. They tried to sign up multiple people. They tried to sign Zeitler in 2021. He didn't want to come here. They ended up trading for Gabe Jackson as a fallback. Gabe Jackson was a declining player that the Raiders were selling high on.
They tried to sign Tooney. They tried to sign Corey Linsley.
Yeah, they've
taken shots. They just don't win.
At some point, Schneider's job is to close deals, so you got to put this on him. I don't think he undervalues it. I think he sticks to his valuations of the players. If you do, that's not really how you win deals in free agency. You have to overpay, and it sucks. Obviously, the best deals are the ones that Philly did with Mekhi Becton and Zach Bond last year.
Right.
But if you're chasing top of the market offensive linemen, you have to pay for them. And unfortunately, Schneider's whole legacy right now is going to be built around this offensive line and all the good things he's done to rebuild the defensive line. And if you look at where the defense was, I came across a box score the other day just looking at like a Geno Smith thing. basically the entire 2022 defense, not that long ago, is gone. There's like 2 guys left.
Yeah.
So Schneider's done an excellent job on that side of the ball. But the offensive line thing can't get away from him. And I think this draft, with their stock of picks and with the signing they made, I think there's immense pressure on him. They've had trouble evaluating. They've brought in new coaches to really help. I don't think he doesn't value it. I just don't think he's been very good at it. And it's the black mark around his legacy right now.
Let's talk about what might be next. And we just talked about the concept that, like, someone else's trash might be a new team's treasure. One name that became pretty obvious is available with the Will Fries signing and the Ryan Kelly signing in Minnesota. And Brock Heward talked at length about this yesterday. Garrett Bradbury, former first-round draft pick, center, used to be very, very good. The last couple of years, PFF grades don't look that highly upon his performance. Clearly, the Vikings didn't value him and have moved off of him, although he's still on their roster. Apparently, though, he's very, very close with Sam Darnold.
Okay.
And, we've heard Kubiak talk about, we know that in his scheme, he takes, whereas Ryan Grubb put all of the responsibility for calling pressures and protections, on the quarterback, right? Which is why we saw Geno breaking the huddle so much earlier last year and doing everything he did at the line of scrimmage. It's the opposite of that in Kubiak's scheme. He puts those protection responsibilities on the center, and he's talked about how you need a veteran center. You need an elite center there to really make it go. And I think they feel good about the guys they have. But someone like Bradbury, who maybe his best years are behind him, but would be incredibly cheap to acquire. You see the value in a guy like that, maybe given where they are right now?
I would do it for a pretty cheap price. If it was like a 6th-round pick or something, or 7th-round pick, I'd probably throw out one of the 7th-round picks to them.
That's what Heward was speculating, and I think his cap hit's like $6 million this year.
When they signed Kelly, I actually had the same thought. And then I looked at some of his numbers, and I'm like, oh boy, he cannot pass protect. But look, now that the Darnold thing is there and the center market is pretty much wiped out, I don't think it's the worst idea. I think of it more as a kind of a stopgap than like a long-term solution. Like, I know a lot of Vikings fans, they have not been particularly high on him. Their interior line actually was a thing that gets overstated, is that it wasn't good last year. I think that's why they were so aggressive to address it. So it's fine. It makes sense from a logistical standpoint, but like, I don't want people to think like, oh, they've solved their center issue because they got Garrett Bradbury, who's just got replaced in Minnesota. But I think from like a transition and a onboarding standpoint, I think it would make a lot of sense. They played together. They were a 14-win team last year, but I think that puts a big emphasis on you got to get pretty good guards around him, because I just looked at my phone a minute ago and they just traded their backup guard in Minnesota, Ed Ingram, to the Houston Texans. So they are trying to get rid of some of those guys. Maybe that means Bradbury's next, but they have a lot of cap space. They can eat him as a backup if they want, or a guard. But if I'm Seattle, it's not a bad idea. I see where Brock's coming from, because I had the same thought.
Given his past, his performance the last couple of years, you would think at some point they'll cut him. And Heward's argument was, well, get out in front of that, offer him a 7th, see if you can get him before he hits the open market. But if he hits the open market, if those reports of that relationship with Darnold are true, then you would think that Seattle would be tops on his list anyway. Before I let you go, and I know as we record this, we're about 10 minutes away from Sam Darnold's introductory press conference. I think we both want to watch that. Let's just finish with this. What might be next? A lot of buzz right now about Cooper Kupp. We just heard, now I'm blanking on his name. Peter, anyway, NFL Network last night, they were talking about how, who's the guy? Peter, the guy. Schrager, and he's got some really good connections with McVay and the Rams, and people have even accused. Yeah,
we know. He tells everyone about
have accused him of working for the Rams. He does like to tell us that. He says people he talks to in the league still think that Kupp can really play. And so maybe someone's out there that's willing to pay him probably more than we'd be comfortable with. But we know he's a Washington kid. We have needs at wide receiver. Not sure if he's a fit with what they have, but, talent always fits, right? Guys like that. And then Kyle Juszczyk. I want to ask you specifically about the possibility of either of those former division rivals, their potential fit, and whether you think they'd be worth the investment.
At first, I didn't even consider Kupp an option. And the more I've thought about it, and the more I've kind of wrapped my head around it, I've actually kind of completely flipped the 180 on that one. And there's a couple of reasons. One, they could use like a leader in that bit room. Like Tyler Lockett's gone. DK Metcalf was not that. JSN seems more like an unassuming, kind of quiet guy. Keeps about his business. He's just a pro. But they can really use a leader. And Cup works in a lot of levels. You talked about the local connection. The offense they've played in is quite similar. It's just an extension of the Shanahan offense. It's a little different, but the routes that Kubiak wants his receivers to run are actually very favorable to Cup. What happened with Cup last year is he had some really good games in the first half of the year. There was like the Bills game was one of them. The early game, he had like 21 targets for like 14 catches. But he's had some injuries to his hamstrings and his lower legs. And by the end of the year, there was just not much left. He looked like he couldn't run anymore. And you saw his numbers just fall off a cliff. And so at some point, like at first, I'm like, this guy's shot. But from just like a draft hedge, now they've signed MVS already. I think that allows you to go into the draft a lot more comfortable. And I think, again, round 2 is a really sweet spot for receiver.
Yeah.
Round 3 is 2, especially if they don't get into that round. So I think it kind of hedges you really well going into the draft where you're not forced to do something. Like, I don't love the idea of taking a receiver at 18. I think hopefully signing a guy like Cup would take that off the table. But I think Cup works, actually. And then you add the local ties. Jake Peets is their passing game coordinator. Jake Peets was the receivers coach with the Rams. And Peets apparently had a very big role with Puka and Cooper Kupp in terms of like installing some offenses over the years. So Kupp is just like a stud of a guy. It's just a matter of him staying healthy. They need some good stories, some good PR right now.
Yeah, that's a huge value.
They need something for the fans to be excited about. They've had a rough week from like a lot of subsect of Seahawks fans. A lot of casual fans are actually pretty happy. So between the offensive line, the trading of Geno and DK, they could use a good story to come out of this thing. And I think Kupp could be pretty good for a year or two.
Although, if they sign him, you're going to get, can he play guard? You're going to get that. What about Juszczyk?
Juszczyk was, my first thought was, okay, they're going to sign him.
Same.
But he's meeting in Pittsburgh on Thursday. And I didn't expect a guy who's, 31 years old or 33 years old. It's been like a 5-time All-Pro to have to take visits. So I don't know if they want to do a physical on him. I don't know if he's had some health concerns, but I was watching him pretty closely yesterday because I thought running the Shanahan offense, who better to play and install this thing than him? Kubiak's fullback last year, Prentice, his name is. I can't remember his first name. Adam Prentice. Yeah. He's on the market too.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just like a cheaper option. Maybe they're going to see. Maybe Juszczyk just wants too much money. But my first thought was, he's a declining player. But if they're going to, I think they need some people who know this offense in the team. So I think Kupp would have value. I think Juszczyk would have value. Someone from San Francisco with Darnold. I think they could use a couple guys to help because I was shocked they didn't bring anyone for Baltimore last year to kind of
right. Yeah, we all were.
Yeah, and I think that was a mistake. I think that first 8 games was a mistake. I think John and his staff got that wrong. Juszczyk makes a lot of sense. He's been the Baltimore ties, so Mike would probably know him pretty well. I'm sure they overlapped at some point there. He is a declining player, but to me, he's an obvious fit.
All right, we do have breaking news before I let you go. Sam Darnold's uniform number has been revealed.
Oh, 14. DK Metcalf's number.
So if you have that DK jersey and you're frustrated and you don't want to spend $150 for a Sam Darnold jersey, you can just spend a lot less and change the nameplate.
They gave him DK's number. Ooh.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was going to happen. I knew that's the number he wore, but I thought, maybe he'll go with, maybe he'll do something else out of deference to.
I guess if DK didn't request a trade, maybe it'd be a little different.
Hey, at least DK, posted the thing this morning. Really, really nice, heartfelt goodbye to the fans. Haven't heard a thing from Geno yet.
He just posted, actually.
Oh, he did? Okay.
He did. So Geno just posted on Twitter a kind of a thank you to Seattle message.
Okay. All right, cool.
I'm not surprised Geno's been a little cold with this thing, though.
The chip on his shoulder is pretty big.
And, I'm not a season ticket holder. I only went to one game last year, but the gap between what people think of him online versus what casual fans think is wider than the stadium in your background. And I have a couple of Seahawks fans that One of them lives in Seattle. One of them lives out here that I know. I'd call them more casual. They hate Geno Smith.
Right.
Amongst my group of guys on my show, I'm known as the Geno hater. Among these guys, they think I'm the biggest homer of Geno Smith they've ever seen because I just try to have like a normal conversation about it.
Right.
And so guys I talked to, their season ticket holders, one of them is one of these guys, he said like the fans, and there's been clips of Geno getting yelled at by Seahawks fans and getting ripped online. I can't imagine he's too upset about getting a fresh start in Vegas, where he's kind of looked at as kind of like a savior option, where they haven't had a quarterback in 20 years, it feels like.
Yeah.
I mean, Derek Carr. I can't imagine he's too upset about it. Like, Pete Carroll's probably the biggest reason his career got revised, along with Geno himself. But from what I understand, Schneider and his staff were hoping for Drew Lock to emerge out of that contest. So Geno had kind of Geno is a stubborn guy, and he's very hard-headed in the best way possible. Not to knock him. That's what makes him who he is.
Yeah, that's how he's wired.
He was pissed off about that contract thing last year when Tua got paid and Jordan Love got paid. He's like, I'm better than these guys.
Yeah.
And the Seahawks don't extend people 2 years out. They haven't, unless they had Josh Allen or something. But they haven't done that. And so I don't think Geno's relationship with the organization was in the best spot. Even last year, they didn't really come out and celebrate him. I don't blame him. Like, I know people are a little more sappier than I am, but like, I kind of understand people when they're pissed off. And
yeah, they're competitors, man. It's how they're wired. I mean,
if I want to leave a job and ultimately I was traded somewhere, I'm not saying like the nicest thing on LinkedIn about my old company.
Right. Wouldn't that be cool if all of our lives were kind of managed that same way? Wouldn't that?
Yeah. I have no problem with it. Like, honestly, like, Geno is who he is. It's what made him be one of the best stories in the NFL the last couple of years. But the job of a personnel guy is not to do who was best last year. It's to project forward. And I understand the logic.
Yeah. Yeah. That's Jeff Simmons, Real Hawk Talk, and the show with Rob Staten. You said every Monday, right? You guys
not as much during the off season, but during the season.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, man. I always appreciate your takes. I always feel like you have that great balance of objectivity, along with your fandom. So, yeah, feels like we're still just getting started on this off season. We'll have to check back in again when we get closer to the draft.
Yeah, we got a whole draft, man.
That's right.
If the Seahawks want to get great again, they got to have a great draft. It's not about free agency.
Well put. Well put. That's Jeff. Thanks for coming on the show, man. All right. Can't wait to get your thoughts on some of Jeff's thoughts and ideas. Be sure to hit those down below in the comments section. Coming up over the next few days, we will react to breaking news. I'll have another live show tonight. If you're watching this on Thursday, I'll go live tonight. And then tomorrow night, going to be doing some things over on the Pulse of the Draft channel. Going to be taking a look at the AFC West and some of their draft needs and do a mock draft where Bryce and I divide up those 4 teams. That'll be kind of fun. So check that out. But I'm also working on some really cool things with some other guests coming up over the next few days as well. Planning on taking the weekend off unless there's any big, huge signings to react to. I'm always here for you for that. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Subscribe to the channel. Check out Jeff's stuff as well. Forever and always go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.